Welcome to the Poetic Study class, session 4. Okay, so previously we have learned about the elements of poetry or literary work, that is intrinsic elements which you can find on the literary work itself. Okay, and then extrinsic elements which you can find outside the literary work or the poem. So for example, from the biography of the writer, the social condition, or the psychological state of the author. And this session we are going to learn a bit about the type of poem or types of poetry. So in the fourth session we are going to learn two types of poems, which is lyric and narrative. Now let's discuss a bit about lyric. What is lyric? Lyric is a brief poem that expresses the personal emotion or thought of a single speaker, or describe something. So when someone describes some things which include the personal emotion and thoughts, then it can be called as lyric poem. Okay, and then it is important to realize that the lyric is in the first person, I. The speaker itself is not necessarily the poet. Okay, and then the lyric itself includes all the shorter forms of poetry. There are sonnet, elegy, ode, and pastoral. So those are the examples of lyrical poems. Okay, and the examples, maybe you can find it yourself. You can browse the internet on that. Okay, and then what is the subject matter of the lyric? Usually it is expressive, whether of personal emotions such as love, and then grief, or public emotions such as patriotism or reverence to celebration. So in elegy and ode itself is usually about patriotism. Okay, and then from the point of view of the lyric, the most important function of the language are the poetic and emotive. It has something to do with the emotion, because these two permit the author to show emotion when an aesthetic language is used. And then the poetic function is the ability to manipulate the language in a creative way. Okay, meanwhile the emotion function is centered in the sender. Okay, and then you can see the example of lyric poem in the PowerPoint. You can see that. Okay, and then now let's discuss a bit about one samples of lyrical poem, that is ode. Okay, ode itself comes from the Greek aidein, meaning to sing or chant, and belongs to the long and varied tradition of lyric poetry. So it is usually written, it was written long time ago. Okay, it originally accompanied by music and dance, so, and later reserved by the romantic poets to convey their stronger sentiments, thought. The ode can be generalized as a formal address to an event, a person, or a thing that is not present. Meanwhile, what is sonnet? So that's the first examples of lyrical poem is ode. Okay, it has something to do with the emotion. Usually it is accompanied by musical, okay, and then dance. And then what is sonnet? Sonnet is the Italian word sonetto, which means a little sound or song. Okay, traditionally it is 14-line poem. Usually it is in 14 line, and then written in iambic pentameter. We are going to discuss that later on. Okay, and then the most popular sonnet writer is William Shakespeare. So you know the history of that poet. Okay, and then the next is elegy. It is a song, a poem or song in the form of elegiac couplet, and then usually it is a kind of mourn of death of an individually. So usually the content is a very sad, because it is to memorize, to commemorate the dead person. Okay, and then you can see the example of the elegy. So I took the example written by Walt Whitman, "Oh Captain, My Captain." So it talks about the grief of the death of one president of the United States. So you can see the example. And then what about the narrative? Narrative itself tells story, to narrate. Okay, like a novel or short story, a narrative poem has plot, characters, and setting. Okay, the example of narrative poem is the one written by Edgar Allan Poe, that is the Raven. I really love that poem because the story is very sad. Okay, and then you can see the poem itself yourself. Okay, narrative poetry presents a series of events through action, and sometimes it uses dialogue into the poem. Okay, and then it features a single speaker, that is the narrator. Traditional forms of narrative poetry include epics and ballads. So the epics and ballads can be included into the narrative poem. Okay, what is ballad? You can read it yourself, and then the epic, the sample of that. Okay, and that's all I think about the lyric and narrative poems. And then please read the assignment. You do it in group. Find one example of lyric and narrative, and then you analyze the lyric or the narrative poem using the elements that you have learned previously, that is extrinsic and intrinsic poem. Okay, so I think that's all. See you again at the next session. Bye bye.